Jodie Emery, one of the leading cannabis activists in this country, joins us on the phone lines to talk about the fact that it's been legalized for a year now and where we're at. Jodie, good morning. Thanks for giving us some time as always, and thanks for being flexible in the timing for us. We appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. So happy to talk with you today.
You and I have talked on the show before about how the people who are benefiting financially from legalization are the people who were already, very wealthy and very well connected. The wife of Gerald Butts, Jodie Butts, has been nominated to be a board member of a cannabis company that's got a relatively significant worth here. This is just an example of what we've been talking about is people who are already well connected are the ones benefiting, and those who are not necessarily well connected don't get to reap the benefits, especially here in Ontario.
Oh, it's absolutely true. And it's such a tragedy that we've had decades and decades of Canadians peacefully protesting prohibition and asking to be legalized and liberated from being deemed criminals. And yet what we've seen is everything that was illegal before is still illegal. That's why there are still raids on dispensaries and heavy fines and jail time on the books. And as I've often said, there are nearly 50 former police, politicians, prime ministers, mayors, premiers running all of these new cannabis companies that are on the stock market. So they've been reaping the benefits not only from a monopoly-style model of control over cannabis, but they're also getting a lot of money from taxpayers being forced to subsidize the entire bureaucracy around cannabis, plus the additional law enforcement spending to keep going after the same people that prohibition went after.
And I think that's obviously remarkably frustrating. And you said on Twitter we could have a conversation about, hey, if you want the system to be better and be more fair, what are the electoral options for that? And what's your opinion on that?
Well, this election is very depressing, I have to admit. It was hard to get excited, and I voted early, and I'm taking part in the system. Your right to vote, you wouldn't want to lose it. So on election day, please go use it. I've said that when I was marching and campaigning in the streets on my own campaigns. But the Liberals really let us down. I don't think the Conservatives would do much better. Quite frankly, I think prohibition is a nonpartisan problem. And the list of all the people cashing in, it's not just a bunch of Liberals. There are Conservatives in there too. So this is about a lot of people with big money who are benefiting from a new criminalization regime that makes it only possible for the well-connected and wealthy to get licenses to sell or grow cannabis legally. This is frustrating for me, but I've also been a nonpartisan activist for a long time. I'm libertarian in ways and socialist in ways, and I don't even like those terms. Mm-hmm. I just believe in liberating Canadians from criminal laws that do more harm than good, and from liberating taxpayers from being forced to finance an extremely wasteful, ineffective prohibition regime, and it's still in place today.
And it just hasn't been done well. And here in Ontario, I think might be amongst the worst examples in the country, where we have a situation where, the next round of stores, London might have 2 stores maybe that sell cannabis. And I said it before the break, and you and I have talked about it before. Why can't we just have this be like the restaurant industry? It's regulated. There are inspections, but at the same time, if you want to have a restaurant, you can just open it up, provided you're willing to follow the rules and provided you're willing to adhere to regulations.
Absolutely. And cannabis could have been legalized simply. It's funny hearing these headlines about how there aren't enough stores and there isn't enough cannabis supply.
Yep.
But, go back 10 years ago, the whole reason to legalize was, wow, there's a lot of stores and there's a lot of weed and it's everywhere, and the law doesn't work when it tries to eliminate it. So prohibition doesn't work. The new prohibition doesn't work. There are still all the cannabis and dispensaries and everything still exist, but just in a horrible warfare where the government comes in and shuts them down so they can open up their own store instead. And in places like British Columbia, the provincial government, like all across Canada, they're in charge of issuing the retail licenses. But when the government has its own stores, like in British Columbia, they don't issue licenses to private operators. They open up their own stores instead, and they're funded by taxpayers. So they don't even need to borrow money or earn the money or risk anything. Mm-hmm. It's the taxpayers who are being forced to pay. But I'm not always Debbie Downer on this issue.
Right.
I think things can get better, and there is a lot of incentive now, 1 year after legalization. All the businesses, stores, producers, advertising, everything, all across the board, medical patients, everybody is upset because everything is too restrictive and prohibitive. So now it's kind of like, I've been right. I've warned everyone. So now let's work together to make things better. And I'm launching a new organization soon called Fair Cannabis. It's to bring together all of the businesses and everybody who has concerns about workplace, people getting fired unjustly, people being evicted from their houses, medical patients not having access to medicine, and even big businesses being forced to pay stupidly high costs for the ability to operate. So we need to attack all of the problems with prohibition. And I don't care who wins government next time. The point is we need to end prohibition truly, liberate all the peaceful Canadians, and allow easy access to licenses, but most importantly of all, cannabis amnesty. If the government really believes legalization is supposed to end the criminalization of cannabis, you cannot say that Joe Smith is a criminal, but his brother Johnny Smith is not because he got a government license to do the very same thing. We need fairness in this. So I encourage people to check out Fair Cannabis. It's not quite launched yet, but once the election happens, we'll know who to campaign for and how, and try and fix all of the problems for everyone who's still suffering from this new prohibition.
Before we go, Jodie, I've got to ask you about the fact that we're a year in, and here in Ontario, again, it's still a frustrating situation. We want it to be better in this province. We elected a government that talked about, hey, free market and getting rid of red tape for business and things along those lines. But that's not what's happened here. So as you said earlier, it doesn't appear to be a liberal, conservative, NDP type of thing. It appears that all the parties in various ways have bungled this issue.
Well, a major issue is that when government gets in the business of doing business instead of just managing the basics of a country, then things get a little messy. And again, they have an unfair advantage of having access to the taxpayer credit card where we pay a bill and they spend like crazy and they're never responsible. And then the funny thing being we pay them to do their jobs with taxpayer dollars too. So we're getting doubly billed. But this is something that the Ford government, I'm hoping, will do the right thing on. They're slashing and cutting all of these bureaucracies and government bodies and everything. But they're not going after the one most wasteful thing, which is prohibition enforcement and the new monopoly regime. Alcohol sales go down where cannabis is more accessible. So it makes sense that all across Canada, the provincial alcohol control boards are controlling the movement of cannabis, the wholesaling to the retail stores. So they don't want to let that go. But I'm hopeful that if we get more conservative governments provincially and across Canada, they should really look at true conservative principles of small government, free choice, get the government out of our bedrooms and our budrooms, just let people make their own choices. And I hope that we can actually get rid of the Ontario Cannabis Store. It's a wasteful bureaucracy that's costing taxpayers. Mm-hmm. So whenever you see the headlines, they're losing money. No, it's the taxpayers. So let's get rid of those bureaucracies, allow the growers to sell to the stores, kind of like Manitoba, and allow for more economic benefits. Because legalization was supposed to mean job creation, but not just government bureaucracy job creation and more police work and task forces. And we have to remember that prohibition and criminal laws do not work. That's why it doesn't make sense to continue deeming all of the dispensaries illegal. Let them open up. Like you said, restaurants can just get a license, just follow the basic rules. But when the government makes the licenses really expensive and almost impossible to get, it only rewards big business. And as we've seen, big business breaks the law too. They just get a slap on the wrist while the kid on the corner trying to open up a dispensary as his first business, he's going to get in a lot of trouble. So that's not fair. That's not true legalization. So let's make it better.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. I hope we can make it better too. But a year in, there's hope for perhaps a better future, I guess, is the way to leave it. Thank you so much for this, Jodie. I appreciate it.
Well, me too. Have a great day.
You too. Bye now. That's Jodie Emery, one of the leading cannabis activists in this country. And she's right. The government is way too involved in this. Way too involved. You can open up a cannabis store. You should just have to go buy a license to do it. And the license doesn't have to be cheap. But the lottery system we have right now here in Ontario makes no sense.